Hey guys, it's Taylor from Rant, and today we're going to see if this Motorola Saber III radio can stand up against the XTS5000 in a range test. So stay tuned. Okay guys, so continuing with our comms check video series today, we're going to see if one of my favorite radios of all time by Motorola, the Saber, this happens to be a Saber III, if that's still relevant to utilize in today's world. So just a little background. Again, this is my favorite form factor of Motorola radios. For whatever reason, I'm just drawn to it. I just like it. So for this test, I include the terrain profile so you guys can see the elevation of our receiver station, the increments of where we're going to be doing our testing from. We're going to do these at 1/2 mile, 3/4 mile, 1 mile, 1 1/4, and 1.5 miles. It will all be done on analog, and of course, we'll just record the results in the receiver, listen to the results at the end, and decide who is the winner. So just a little background if you're not familiar. The Saber series of radios were developed by Motorola in 1989. They were initially developed for the military, and they were noted right away for their long but super thin shape, which makes it great for sticking in a pocket. The Saber later became popular with many public safety agencies throughout the country. I know LAPD, NYPD are all pretty notorious for, back when carrying Sabers. There are Saber variants that were sold and rebatched for sale in other countries, but they were done so under different names. So if you ever see the MX1000, that was a Saber that was sold in Europe, or the Stornophone 7000, they were just Saber variants, again, that they were just renamed for sale in other countries. There are basically 3 models. There's the Saber 1, Saber 2, and Saber 3, and they're basically all the same radio, but more or less, with as far as features go, that's kind of where the delineation is. The Saber 1 has no controls at the front panel. The Saber 2 will have a display and some push buttons, and the Saber 3 is the most full complete one. In addition to the 3 red buttons, you're also getting the full telephone keypad. And of course, in pure Motorola styles I've commented on before, the features, the functions, and the frequencies of all versions of the Saber radios are programmed with proprietary software from Motorola, and that is known as Radio Service Software, or RSS. So even on the Motorola Saber 3s, there are some slight differences, and I'm going to show you what those are right now. So this would basically be your standard Saber 3 radio. You can see the form factor. What I want you to pay attention to is you have your battery here, and then right above that is the speaker. And you'll notice on the top, there is no writing. They offered a version of one that had encryption in it, and that was the System Saber. So this is still a Saber 3 radio. However, you'll notice that there is a gap in between the speaker and the battery right here, and that's to allow for the encryption module to fit. Also, when you look at the top, you'll notice right here, it says SecureNet. So this one could, if installed, this one does have an encryption module in place. Just for a quick walk around of the radio, the top of the unit is the volume control and your channel selector with 12 positions. It has 48 channels in 4 zones, or 120 channels in 10 zones, depending on which model you have. Again, the System Saber will have the built-in crypto module, which is operated via this selector switch. And basically, the plain O is no encryption. And if you switch to the top, the O with the cross through it is your secure operation. Going to the far left side of the radio, your top button, this is going to be the squelch button, which allows for the squelch or noise cancellation to be open for as long as the button is pressed. If you keep it depressed for 3 seconds, it will open it up. It's pretty standard on a lot of your current radios. Beneath that, you're going to have your push to talk button, which is the large textured button. And then below that are there going to be these 2 smaller buttons, and these are your RAT buttons, which is repeater access tones. And they can only be used if your radio has version 6D or later, the core CORE firmware. So again, I said there were, 3 kind of variations of the Saber radios. First was the Saber 1, and that's the most simple version of the Saber. It had no controls on the front, no display on it, just, flat plastic. They're pretty easy to recognize. The only 2 controls it had was the volume and your channel selector. They were at the top of the radio, and this version had basically 12 programmed channels, or 15 if you had a modification done to it. Then you have the Saber II. This is the more advanced version of the Saber I, and that radio was menu driven and had some extras, features and channels. It did have the front LCD display, and it only has the top 3 red buttons. So, and then finally, there's the Saber III. Obviously, that's what I have. And this is just basically the Saber model with full controls. So it's the most complete version of the Saber. The case is identical to the Saber I and the Saber II, but the front panel is different. And you'll see it's got the 3 red buttons that the Saber II has, as well as the rest of the telephone keypad. It contains a microcontroller, it has a memory, the display, and a 15-button keypad. So one of the really cool things, if you can possibly find it, Motorola, they did make a Saber that was submersible. But, you know, again, it was an option from the manufacturer, from Motorola. And basically the radios had the appropriate seals and rubber gaskets in all the open areas of the case, including the speaker and grill. So, you know, generally they had the word submersible printed on the top panel. And externally submersible radios are identical to the standard versions, again, except that they would have submersible printed somewhere on it. As far as programming these go, this is where, as with all Motorola products, kind of their biggest, you know, hiccup is, or you know, pain in the butt is. So as Saber radios go, they have a predetermined amount of frequencies and channels on which they operate, and they need to be programmed prior to use. There is no FPP with these, and you have to use the dedicated software. And this is not an easy task because, number one, there, of course, is a special interface, proprietary programming cable. You need a radio interface box. You need that RSS, that radio service software. And then you need an old 386 PC that runs DOS. And this is probably the most difficult to find part, as the RSS software was written many, many years ago. Obviously, it's 2024 now. But this is before, you know, when Windows and faster processors were not yet available. So the software uses built-in timing loops that are processor speed dependent. And as a result, the RSS can only be used on an old PC with a 386 processor that runs no faster than 50 megahertz and has no cache, or, you know, if you were able to disable the cache. Any attempt to try to program with a faster, you know, processor will brick the radio and ruin it. So that's just a little quick history. Again, I love the Saber radios. I think they're awesome. But we're going to see how they do on this range test. So right here where we're starting is the half-mile mark. So on analog, and we'll use the System Saber just to give it the shot. And we'll go ahead and call out, and then we'll do it on the XTS. Again, analog only on both, and we'll see what the results are. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Half mile out on the System Saber.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Half mile out on the System Saber.
Testing half mile out on the XTS5000. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Testing half mile out on the XTS5000. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We'll go out to 3/4 of a mile, see what happens. Okay, here we are, 3/4 of a mile. Back to the System Saber. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3/4 mile range on the Saber.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3/4 mile range on the Saber.
And now for the XTS. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3/4 mile range. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the XTS. Okay, go to a mile.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3/4 mile range. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the XTS.
Okay, so we're here at the 1 mile mark, and I have to say, any elevation that we lost on the way, you know, to this spot, we just gained. So we were pretty much going nothing but uphill to get to the top here. But back to the System Saber. Testing System Saber, 1 mile out. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Testing System Saber, 1 mile out. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Now for the XTS. Testing 1 mile out. On the XTS, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another good point of note here is the fact of I am using a UHF whip antenna, one specific for the Saber and then one specific for the XTS, so the antenna comparisons, you know, are pretty fair.
Testing 1 mile out. On the XTS, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, 1.25 miles we go. Okay, 1.25 miles. Here we go. Testing 1.25 miles. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the Motorola System Saber.
Testing 1.25 miles. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the Motorola System Saber.
Now for the XTS. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1.25 mile range on the XTS. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, mile and a half.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1.25 mile range on the XTS. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so we are here. 1.53 miles exactly. Let's see what happens. Testing on the Saber. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1.5 miles. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing on the XTS. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1.5 miles. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, let's go back and see what we got as far as the results go. So there we have the results. One of the things I do like about always doing these range tests with the radios is the fact that the results are what they are. Obviously, I like doing this in real world conditions. These are clearly less than optimal conditions with the foliage on the trees, the elevation changes, but the Saber definitely held its own. The XTS, the audio sounded a little clearer most times, but when we got to that 1.5 mile mark through the woods, over the terrain, neither radio got an audible signal through. So I gotta say, the Saber's holding its own. There you have it. If you like this content, please make sure to like and subscribe. Obviously, these videos take time to make. That simply helps justify the effort put into them. So we'll see you next time.